So there's me. I won't keep you too long, I'll just rattle through these slides. So I'm a compiler guy, or ex-compiler guy. I did source code analysis, and these days I do research in software engineering. Lots of ways of getting hold of me. The slides are all on GitHub, so if you know my GitHub address, you go and look in the talks. You can find all the slides, all the references, and so on. So I do research in industrial-based software engineering. There's a book here, which in fact you can't buy on Amazon because they've run out of print. But you can download the PDF. And there's about 500,000 people who've downloaded the PDF, and about 100 people have bought the book. So, and you can get all the data and all the code. It's all there, and yeah, whatever. So I'm going to be a quick overview I want to talk about. So it's about language migration. So I'm going to talk about a bit about how people have done this in the past, what's happened in the past. To talk about some patterns in the Java to Kotlin migration. People have done research on this, and talk about some of the potential futures going on. So in the past, I guess the only equivalent kind of sort of migration was C to C++. In the late 80s, early 90s, when C++ came out and people moved over from C. My experience, I was in the source code analysis business back then, that people would claim that they're using C++. And actually what happened is that they were using C++ comments. They'd edited all the structs out, keywords out, and called them class. And they were calling new rather than malloc. And their code compiled with the C++ compiler, and they were claiming to do C++. And that was it. Now that had the advantage, you could have a whole load of people claiming to use C++, even though they weren't. And so C++ gained a whole momentum. So we've had new C standards since then. Nobody's really studied it. There's something called K. If you don't know what C is, you probably don't even know what K and RC, which is a really old way of defining functions in C. Once C90 came out, it took about 10 years, or more than 10 years, for that particular way to die out. It takes a long time for old habits to die. There have been lots of C++ standards coming out. They come out now every 3 years. And people tend to study the new features. What new features are people using? And there's lots of articles about why particular designs have been chosen. Strustrup, who's original designer of the language, he's forever writing papers about the evolution of the language. Those are his two main papers. So he talks about his ideas, but very few people actually study how the users are actually using the language and how they're adopting his ideas. There's one example here from KDE where people's actually gone and looked at how KDEs are adopting it. One study of Java, which I guess is relevant. Again, it's a study of how people are using new features of Java. In this particular case, they're using lambda expressions. They'll go and grab a whole lot of Java code and then look for how people are using lambda expressions. So there's not a lot of research out there on language migration. It's not something that people do very often. So what does the data have to say? Well, of course, Kotlin came out way before Google announced first-class support for Android, and before it became their preferred language. So the studies have looked at two kinds of things. They looked at the binaries. Now, the advantage of studying binaries is it's much easier to do, and there's lots of them out there. There's a site called Andrew Zoo you can go and visit. They've got about 20-odd million, 24 million now, I think, Android binaries you can play around with, and it's designed for researchers to go and research. The other way that people study Kotlin to Java migration is by looking at source code, which tends to be invariably on GitHub, and they would select repos that contain both Java and Kotlin that have so many stars or have so many active users and so on. So those are the two sources of data. So let's have a quick look at the binary data. This is the paper I'm quoting from. The talks repo has all the code and data for this paper. So if you want to go and play around with the data, it's all there. So they picked about 200,000 APKs from the Andros zoo between January 2017 and December 2020. Now you might say, well, 2020 was almost 4 years ago. Well, of course, we had this COVID thing happened, and then we've had large language models. And the impact of large language models is the entire software engineering community has stopped doing what they're doing and going over and doing stuff with language models. It's, you know, doing X with LLMs, and it's like, you look at the conference papers, it's all LLM. So the traditional research has kind of been put on hold, and hopefully it will come back. So the papers really kind of, you know, they're not up to date as such. So anyway, so out of this 200,000 APKs, about 5% contained Java and Kotlin. The rest were pure Java only, which is kind of to be expected, really. Kotlin is very new. There's people are, if they're happy with their existing app, why change? You'd expect the new stuff to be Java plus Kotlin, and the old stuff just to lurk around and eventually die out. So that was a situation in 2020. And if you look at the APKs, each one of those plus is a 30-day bin. And it just asked in the question, does the APK contain any Kotlin, or in particular, one class? Does it contain at least one class of Kotlin? And this is days from 2017, and at the beginning there was none, and then by the end of 2020 we've got something like 30% or a third of all APK new releases containing at least one class of Kotlin. So it is growing, and I imagine if there was more data, then people went and analysed it, presumably that will still keep going up. So okay, so that's the app contains at least one class of Kotlin. Well, out of how many classes? What's the ratio of Java and Kotlin? So this graph, we've got Java. So each one of those pluses is an APK, and we've got Java across the bottom and Kotlin across the top. And notice we've got log scales. So that's saying, you know, a particular APK has got so many Java classes and so many Kotlin classes. And those lines are regression lines. The red line is 2017, which is this side, and the purple line or blue purpley line, that side is 2020. And what's that? And there's the regression equation at the top there. So what it essentially boils down to is that Kotlin classes are growing at the rate of about 33% a year in terms of an app. That's what that line is showing. It doesn't look like 33% because it's on a log scale. So that's the rate of growth. Now, eventually, of course, that will have to slow down because an APK will be mostly Kotlin. So it can't keep up that rate forever. So that's the status if we're looking at binary files. About 5% of the APKs contain no Kotlin, and those that do, they're ramping up very quickly, and they're quickly moving over to using Kotlin rather than Java. So let's look at some source code. This is some source code data. This is looking at 387, the source of 387 apps from the F-Droid market and the Android Time Machine, which is essentially GitHub plus odds and ends. And again, this is saying that the source contains at least one usage of the features across the bottom. So type inference is almost 100%, and Lambda is sort of 95%. But then you have to ask, well, Java now has Lambda. Is that really a Kotlin feature, or is that just Lambda? How would you compare Kotlin Lambda against Java Lambda? Safe call and so on, unsafe call, features across the bottom. So this is an analysis of source code, at least one usage. And you'd have to say, well, how many usages would you expect, really? I guess type inference is very common. Some of the other stuff like contracts, you wouldn't perhaps expect that many usage. So it's a difficult thing to look at. So, right, now I start getting some controversial stuff. Oh, sorry, one more. This is a project controversion. Duolingo for Android. They converted all their Java over to Kotlin. The Java's the red line, the Kotlin's the green line, and you can see it took them about 2 years. And they used the auto-converter in the IDE. They fixed the compilation errors and refactored, and that's what happened. And that's lines of source code on the left-hand side there. So they did it about 2 years. That's how long. That's the only example I've seen of a commercial company doing it. All the other code was the source code was all open source. The binaries were commercial and open source binaries. Right, now we get commercial. Possible futures. So Google wants to lock in developers, as Apple does as well. All vendors always want to lock developers into them. So, and of course they're doing that via Kotlin. So the question is, it boils down to ecosystem economics. Is it worth learning Kotlin? And the answer is, well, if there are career prospects, then yes, people are going to want to learn Kotlin. They can get a job writing in Kotlin. Now, is there employment outside the Android ecosystem? Well, if the Android ecosystem is very big, who cares? Now, the Department of Defense invented this language called Ada, and they said, everybody, all our code's going to be written in Ada. And this was back in the 80s. And the developers said, well, how big is the DoD ecosystem? Do I want to spend my entire career in the DoD ecosystem? And most of them said, well, no, not really. And so they had this problem that people thought, well, I don't want to be stuck in there. So if Android is a big success, which of course it is at the moment, and presumably it will in the future, then the people are not going to care about employment outside of the ecosystem. Language popularity counts as well. Employers like to hire people who know the language. And there's a lot of trendiness in there. Listening and talking to people here tonight, people saying they've been using Kotlin for a long time. Presumably some of that was trendy. When Kotlin was hot and new, that a group of people jumped on it, said, right, we're learning that. Like people are learning Rust now and all the new languages that are coming out. There's a huge trendiness and fashion to do with languages. Now people have alternative choices. I mentioned Java. Java could always take the Oracle, who now own Java, or chunks of Java, or copyright, anyway, bits of it, could say, well, we're going to try and take back all those Kotlin developers. We're going to add features into Java, just like Kotlin, so that the Kotlin people can't say, oh, Kotlin's better than Java. So who knows what's going to happen with Java. And of course, because of the AI buzz and Python, is Python going to become a big thing in the Android ecosystem? Is Python really set up for that? We don't know. So part of this course boils down to Google's return on investment. Kotlin is really a strategic investment for them. They can't walk away from it. Google are well known from walking away from lots of things, but can't really see that they walk away from that. And of course, Apple have Swift. Now, people normally say we're hiring. I'm not hiring, but I'm always interested in data. And if you have any software engineering data, I offer to do a free analysis, provided I can make an anonymous version public. So if you have any software engineering data you think I might be interested in, come and grab me and have a chat. Okay, thank you very much. I think I've overrun my 5 minutes.
Any questions?
Do you have any, I don't know if this intuition is the right word, of the proportion of, because you analyze public data in public domain versus what's obviously in private, in sort of the corporate world, and what's the ratio?
I go around talking to developers and they say it tends to be it's driven by developers, or perhaps I only meet the ones where it's driven by. You talk to people and I say, oh, you're using Kotlin. How widely is it used? You know, it'll start off with one person and it will slowly migrate in. And from the management point of view, it's a matter of cost. They've got Java people, they've got to spend money training up the Kotlin people. What are the benefits? And if the developers do a good sales job on it, then management will say, management want to keep developers happy. So if the developers say, yes, we want to use Kotlin, management will go with them. So it depends what kind of developers you've got, you know, whether you've got the sort of Jobsworth type people, or if you've got the younger crowd who want to learn something new. It's very hard to say. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm particularly curious to know about all these sort of Android using Java code bases in private, in private companies. How many more? Because yes, the Android marketplace is such that you probably get loads of apps written on GitHub and so on, and that's good. But I'm curious to know, like, what are we dealing a ratio of 2 to 3?
I don't know, but based on the fact that management hates spending money, I would say most of it is in Java and will stay in Java, because changing it to Kotlin is going to cost them money and and they don't want to do that. So they might change bits of it, or new stuff might be written in Kotlin because they've got some developers. So it's about, but when they sell apps, they don't, to customers, they don't say, oh, it's written in Kotlin or it's written in Java. That's all completely hidden. So it's purely an internal thing. If internally you've got a few developers who are pushing Kotlin, they can make it happen. But the problem is, just spending money. Sorry, I saw him first, and then go. Yeah.
If I understood correctly, you mentioned that there was a tool or an analysis on APK files.
Yep.
What's the applications?
So.
To evaluate how the applications were written using Java versus Kotlin.
Yes.
I was wondering if in that analysis we're taking consideration like well-known standard libraries, like let's say I build an application and I use Kuhava, or those which are written in Java, but my application that I write myself may be written in purely Kotlin. Was that taken into consideration in the analysis? No,
they just looked at the APK. They took all the classes in the APK. That was it. Because if you look at the sizes, there are like 10,000 classes there. So there's a lot of classes. So some of them will be libraries. Yes. Sorry, you.
It was very similar. It was how many tracking the rewriting of Java libraries into Kotlin, like HTTP. Because to me that's a really good indicator of the shift in the community, where you're moving from Kotlin using Java libraries to using its own.
I was surprised when I first saw that 0.0008 days. Oh, that's really small. But of course, it's compounding. And 33% a year, I was quite surprised that it was that big. I thought, wow, 33% a year. That's a huge amount. Excuse me. It would be nice. Most of my research, I tend to read other people's papers and grab their data. Actually doing it yourself takes forever. So, because I do wide coverage rather than deep coverage. So it's going to be a few years before everybody gets over the LLM nonsense. So Android Zoo is certainly there. So and these people made the tool available. So if someone here wants to go and grab some APKs and do it themselves, go for it. Yeah.
I found the was it Duolingo graph really interesting, because as you say, like moving the whole app from Java to Kotlin is a huge investment. Do you get a sense for your work of what those organisations think about like after they finish the transition? Like, do they regret it? Do they think it's a great idea?
Well, of course, they're not. The only articles I've seen are by the people who promoted it. So they're not going to say, oh, it was a terrible mistake. It was a big success, everyone's happy, there are fewer bugs. But that's true of all languages. The enthusiasms for language X, I always say language X is fantastic. And there's no research showing any language is any better than any other language. So all the claims, it's all opinions, all the way down. Sorry, yeah, go on. What, this one?
My kind of experience of Kotlin versus Java is that the number of lines of code in Kotlin it requires to do the same amount of lines of code in Java is actually much less.
But they ran it through an autoconverter, and an autoconverter will probably leave everything the same. And then they refactored, and you think, well, how much did they refactor? So that was always true in the C++ days, that you convert from C to C++, but you're not really using C++ features, and you have to rewrite. So they did it the sort of the easy way, and then presumably they'll do other fancier stuff later. Sorry, yeah.
David stole my question.
It's just, I think, in terms of conversion of this app, so I'm not an Android developer, but my understanding is that Android has Kotlin as default. So when you convert to that, you kind of win, because that's now the way to do things. Obviously, Google can change their mind. And the other thing, as I understand, Google doesn't own Kotlin at all. JetBrains own it. Google doesn't even pay them. All they get, JetBrains, just ads from Google and listing. So it's like, just for context. That's my understanding.
Well, it'd be interesting to see. There's lots of talk about splitting Google up and stripping off the Android. That you think, well, but they can't. They just can't kill off Kotlin, can they? It's a strategic. They have to continue to support it.
I'm just repeating what I've been told.
Okay.
So it's like Google doesn't own it at all. So.
There is a Kotlin Foundation, and it's governed by the multiple companies, so it's...
No, but they don't have like the knowledge and everything, right? They don't develop. I mean, I'm
Sorry.
just teaching what I asked the same question.
Hang on. We got.
Did you take into account any of the data from the sort of back-end, not Android ecosystem? So libraries within Kotlin or anything like that in comparison to...
So what do you mean by...
I guess what I'm getting at is this is in the light of mobile development app.
Yeah.
Do you have any data that highlights sort of back-end side of it?
Oh, yeah. Okay, you're running in the cloud. Yeah. No, because you have to be able to get at it, and if you got stuff on the cloud owned by a company, they're not going to let you get at their stuff. Yeah, so this is GitHub, or people who've scraped the Google Play Store and the various Chinese Play Stores and so on. So to do the research, you have to go and get the data or the code from somewhere, and it tends to be GitHub and Google Play Store, and there are there's Chinese people doing some really interesting research on the Chinese Play Stores, which are huge.
Migrated to Kotlin, and halfway through they reverted the decision for some reason.
There have been some surveys. I tend to avoid surveys because they cherry pick the answers. The researchers pick the answers that they want to present, and so but it certainly might have happened. But because I tend to avoid survey papers, I have not seen it. But I'm certainly it certainly happened. Yeah.
Sorry, I appreciate you might not have the answer because we never know what would have happened. But based on the numbers that you put together and on your investigation and following the discussion we were having with Google and Android and stuff, how much do you think that Kotlin benefit from Google adopting as a default language?
Oh, huge! It's a huge. Yeah. I think it's huge. Well, of course, they forced it through the Oracle lawsuit, but that stamp of Google saying, right, this is it now. It's about market perception. I remember when Pascal was heavily used, and the switch to C was happening, and I said, well, why are you switching to C? Oh, because Unix was written in C. Well, so what? But it kind of created this developer mindshare of you have to use C. C was the way to go. So people were switching from Pascal to C. And then C++ came out. Well, why are you switching to C++? Because it's new, it's trendy, you know, that's what all my mates are using.
That's exactly my point. So do you think that Kotlin would still be, I mean, not this popular, but very popular if it wasn't adopted by Google?
It's difficult to say because you'd say, well, why was Rust popular? Why is Go popular? there are certain languages that can't, and the Microsoft ones don't seem to create the developer buzz. It's sort of like almost a random pick of languages get picked up and they take off, and I don't know. I sometimes try and predict which is going to be the next most popular language, and at the moment my pick is Z, and the only reason I'm picking Z is because the very few languages start with the letter Z. So that's my only reason for picking it, because all my rational reasons for picking it have always failed. So I don't know. I've watched for a long time and tried to predict, and I've always got, like when PHP came out, I was going like, what? No, it's got to fail, and it didn't. It's like the top 10 in the music. Some just happen to catch on, and some don't. So Kotlin might have been a success. It might not, but certainly Google pushing it, was a big bang. Up it went. Yeah.
Because you've spent the last 4 years doing LLM research, who's going to win?
Which one? Well, I think LLMs will have the impact that they do very well when there's lots of training data. So I think they will kill off the minority programming languages because there isn't enough training data. So Kotlin might be killed off because there isn't enough source code out there for LLMs to do very well on Kotlin. So it might kill Kotlin for that reason, because if everyone codes using a large language model, they're going to pick the languages that it does very well at. So that's my only prediction around LLMs. Which one? I don't know. I'm rooting for the open weights models, because you think you don't want the big companies to control it all. Yeah. Sorry, don't yeah.
In one of the graphs that you were showing the growth of Kotlin, this one,
Yeah.
there. Did you look at what that was? And it went up and then down.
Well, I guess that's 2019. That's perhaps that's Google. Yeah, that might be.
People jumped and rolled back.
Well, this is new apps coming out, so there's a new app on, and that was the release date of that app. Perhaps everyone thought, oh, we'll stick one in. We'll have one class of Kotlin to see what it's like. Sorry.
It was back to LLMs. Is anybody trying to use deep learning programming models with LLMs, or is it just all?
Yeah, it's difficult to separate out the hype. You have to invest a lot of time to separate out the hype from the reality, and things are moving so fast. I was at a workshop actually this time last year, and academics were really depressed because all their expert knowledge has been blown out of the water. Their entire field was kind of just gone, or just whatever. So people are still trying to find their feet, and they're doing LLMs with this, LLMs with that, LLMs with bananas and apple, whatever. So it's all kind of depressing because it's really nonsense research, but it's getting published. So it will take a while for the whole thing to settle down. Yeah. You're good? Okay, thank you.